talk about these kung fu masters in China getting their asses kicked. A lot of
Yeah.
it has just been this one guy going around because he's this mixed martial arts fighter, and he said he was tired of seeing like a lot of these people say that they're these kung fu masters and they're like charlatans. They're like taking people's money, claiming that they have all of these ancient techniques where they can like kill you with one punch and this one punch knockout and all these different crazy techniques they can use, and they don't even want to use it because they don't want to kill anyone. And he was just like going around challenging them. And the reality of it is a lot of these kung fu masters, they're just middle-aged men who've never been in a real fight. They just punch against air, they break boards, but there's no real strength and conditioning, training that they actually do. And honestly, it wouldn't have even taken this mixed martial arts guy to knock half of these guys out. An average Joe who just has some kind of physical activity could do it, because these guys, they have no muscular tone at all and no conditioning at all. And this even goes back to Bruce Lee used to talk about this way back in the 70s, that he felt like you can't just practice martial arts to physical training and weight training and things like that. But yeah, this has been a trend going on for a while, and the government had to step in because they felt it was disgracing their culture. So China stepped in so that these one-sided fights will stop, and they stopped people from using the whole kung fu master, um, you know, label. So, what are your thoughts on this whole situation? And being someone like like me as well, who grew up in the '80s, where we saw a lot of these kung fu movies and a lot of these martial arts dojos and stuff were a lot more popular than they are now before mixed martial arts took off.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that a lot of this stuff, start, got rolling in the 1970s, with Bruce Lee, and after Bruce Lee. So I remember growing up early in the 80s where you did have a lot of this, like, phony stuff, or like what they would say, like bullshido. There was a lot of this going on, like deadly finger strikes, and some
Are you saying
tiger
they were calling it bullshit even back then?
bullshido. Yeah, bullshido is like in Japan they have the thing called bushido, which is
Uh-huh.
like the way of the samurai. So there was always the term bullshido, which goes way 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 back, to the early 80s. Um,
I'll let you continue, but for me, just being a little bit younger than you, we're close to the same age. I didn't really like until I saw it with my own eyes. I never heard anything about this stuff being fake. It just took me a while to say, hey, like this Steven Seagal breaking bones and all this shit I saw in the '70s with these old movies. I don't think these guys could really do this in real life. It took me like realizing it myself, but I just thought everybody just took it at face value. But that's interesting.
yeah. Well, I mean, Steven Seagal, like, if you look at his movies, like Above the Law, that was one of the more authentic displays of martial arts that you'll ever see on film, for sure. But you know, going back, what I was saying is that when you go back to the 1980s, like I was involved in the martial arts from about the age of 6, and there were a lot of martial arts back in those days that were falsely advertised as, like, tiger claw, dragon style, centipede style. Like, a lot of this stuff was big back in the 1980s, and it clearly wasn't effective, but people didn't know any better. And I know a lot of people, including myself, who took classes in these exotic types of martial arts that were not effective. Um, the first thing that I came close to that was somewhat of a contact form of martial arts was Taekwondo, and I started taking Taekwondo in like 1987, and Taekwondo was full contact, so it was a whole different look from the karate kung fu stuff that I did when I was younger. Now, what you got to understand is, like, full contact, karate, kickboxing, and those types of things, that really just began in the 1970s. If you look at the history of martial arts prior to the 1970s and like the Bruce Lee era, and even before that in the 60s and the 50s, when like Chuck Norris was competing, it was all point karate. Full contact just didn't happen. The only kind of full contact thing was like Muay Thai, um, which was considered like to be kind of like a savage type of fighting in those days. So kind of fast forwarding to the 1990s when the UFC originated in like 1994. Um, that was sort of the culmination of like which one of these martial arts really works in a fighting situation. Like let's just go bare knuckle, no rules, and see what style is the dominant style. So you had the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, you had the Muay Thai guy, you had the Taekwondo guy, you had the wrestler guy, you had the boxer, you had all these different styles. That like catch wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu were the two more dominant styles in the early days of the UFC, and it's kind of evolved into now. When the UFC originated, it wasn't MMA at that point. It was just considered ultimate fighting. MMA kind of emerged out of that. The issue here is China, because they're a communist country and they're so restricted with their internet access and their ability to watch like American television and their ability to watch like other things that are out there. They never went through that revolution of the UFC back in the 1990s. They didn't live through that, right? So even as of today, their exposure to like mixed martial arts and Muay Thai and all this, the way that martial arts have evolved over the last 25 years, they missed the boat on that. So a lot of them are still thinking like that their traditional cultural styles still have some effectiveness in fighting. And just as it was back in like the early 1980s, you have all these falsely advertised forms of kung fu that are not effective. They're pretty in some cases, but they're not effective. So this MMA guy goes in there, who's a modern day fighter, and he's an older guy too. He's not that young. I think he's like in his mid 40s. And in a real MMA fight, this guy wouldn't stand a chance. But he just goes in there and bashes these kung fu masters left and right. And it got to the point where the government was initially embarrassed, and they forced him to wear like clown makeup for fights. He still bashed people. They were torturing the guy and censoring him and trying to ruin his life.
Yeah, there were death threats made to his family. It was crazy.
Everything. But I think now they've kind of got to a point where they've come to realize where like a lot of these like fake kung fu guys are exactly that. They're fake. It's just not this stuff just doesn't work. So this is China kind of like where we were in the United States back in like the early 1980s, where we actually believed in, no, I don't want to say collectively, but there was a belief in these like exotic styles of kung fu. And now they're coming to realize where this stuff is just pure garbage. And it's nowadays very, very hard to fool most Americans because they kind of know what's out there at this point. And when you start doing this like Tai Chi and all this other like quote unquote self-defense stuff where I'm gonna like rip your arm off and twist you and do this, like people just know that doesn't work. So martial arts now has kind of evolved into just things that are either practical on the street or things that are competition based. And I think like to a certain degree, Bruce Lee's original vision for martial arts was like street based stuff, like what's really going to work in a fight. Um, Competition stuff, of course, with certain rules and regulations, has come out of this as well. The final point that I'm making is this guy here is fighting these kung fu masters in a competition sense. Now, if you went just pure bare knuckle street fight, the results probably would have been much worse. These kung fu guys may have gotten killed. So
yeah, because when you look at the fights, it's not even like they were doing this like Tai Chi shit. They would put up their hands in like some like weird position, And the minute the
Mhm.
fight started, they're just slapping their hands at him like a little girl. You know, it's
Well, well,
not using
that's
any technique at all. Like they're
right.
not prepared for a guy to come rushing at them. They're prepared
Mhm.
to stand by themselves, wave their arms and hands around against ear, and that's it.
Yeah, well, that was the traditional style of like Chinese kung fu, where it was just like a very upright position and a lot of like hand movement and stuff. That was what Bruce Lee originally studied from Yip Man. But he came to realize like he would see like he saw Muhammad Ali fight, and he realized that the style just had absolutely no, it was just totally unrealistic, you know. Um, so like when you look at like the original style of kung fu, like that's what it was. It was just a lot of like upright stuff. Your hands were kind of in front of your body, and the whole belief was to kind of like keep your hands tight in a very centered position, so people couldn't really see the punches coming. But you can't really generate any real power when you do that, and you don't have any real defense. And then the other thing that Bruce Lee realized as well is you also have to be you also have to have conditioning. You also have to have cardio, and that was one of the things that Bruce Lee also believed in, is like you got to be in physical shape if you want to fight people. It's not just technique by itself. Most people after like 60 seconds in a regular fight are exhausted. So when you look at these MMA guys who in some cases are going like 25 minutes, that's extraordinary cardio to go that long. But if
Mhm.
you're really in a fight, you have to, it's not just the technique, but it's also like, can you really can you really last? And so when you talk about like the old style, like, is it wushu or whatever it is? Like when you talk about the old
Yeah,
style,
Wushu masters.
yeah, like it's not practical stuff. It really isn't. So you can make up whatever names you want, but if you don't have cardio, you don't have conditioning, and you don't have a ground game, because a lot of fights end up on the ground anyway. You know, um, it's just not going to work out for you.
Yeah, because yeah, they're saying right here in the article that they would call themselves Wushu masters, go out and stage public fights. And even some of the videos I saw, these guys would be they call for like a guy to come charging at them. They wave their arms around, and the guy would just fall to the ground and start convulsing. It's kind of like these pastors do, or when they're in these black churches and they're like talking in tongues and they're touching someone's head and they start like collapsing to the ground. It's all just like a big production to get money out of people.
Well, yeah, like I mean, so when you go back to like the original styles, like was called Wing Chun, and that was kind of like the karate style was like they have like that little cylinder with the little bars that come out, and they kind of use their hands and stuff. Like a lot of it was that, not really practical stuff. I mean, granted as well, like you have seen like these Steven Seagal videos where he's just like walking and there's like 100 people and he's flipping them all over the place. Like people have seen stuff like that as well. But like also, and
Yeah, Wing Chun, I guess, is pressure point because it's saying right here he beat up a Wing Chun pressure point master
yeah.
in a minute. So I
But
guess it's a
you
pressure
talk
point.
about somebody like a Steven Seagal, because he gets a lot of flack for being a phony martial artist, because he's done a lot of phony things. But
Mhm.
also like he has done some legit stuff. And in his early fights, a lot of his techniques, like his wrist grabs and a lot of his little maneuvers, were very well done. In terms of martial arts techniques. Although, like I would not say in any way he's a complete fighter, but he did have good technique in terms of his wrist locks and a lot of his submission type moves and stuff like that. Like his early movies were very good with that.
Yeah, I'm
He's
not
a
knocking that aspect of it because I even defended him a couple weeks ago on our show. My only thing with him is that like people in a fight aren't going to like come at you in the way that those people came at him. Like what he actually did to them may be legit, but they wouldn't come at him in the way that they come at him in his movies.
Well, it depends on the video and the source. Like if you look at his early movies, that was a little more realistic. When you look at some of his YouTube clips where he's doing like these demonstrations, it's just fucking crazy. I mean, he's taking like 10 people and like looking at them and they're fainting. Like it's just it's gone like really too far. But like
Mhm.
originally, he did have pretty good technique. And like you look at some of the early fights from like Above the Law and Hard to Kill, it was a little bit more reality based. I mean, it wasn't, those movies weren't by any means outlandish, but he's evolved into something that's been outlandish, you
Mhm.
know. But that's just, you know, I mean, with martial arts, like, you know, people want one show. Like I'll go back and I'll watch like 70s kung fu movies. Like I know that shit's not real, and it's impossible to even win a fight like that. But you know, it's pretty stuff, and it's well orchestrated at times. So you know, you like to watch stuff. Yeah, this is the clip right here of him just doing some fucking wild shit.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's just flipping people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, this looks like Daisy movies, though. He just wave his arms around and people go flying.
Yeah, but I don't know. Like he's not. It's like he's not even trying. He's just flipping this guy all over the place. I mean, the technique is not wrong, but when you
Yeah.
look at a guy, his size,
Well, you see that was really bad because the guy flipped himself over.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
But
look at this is like
the technique itself wasn't bad,
he
but
just
it's
let
just
go of his arm. He just
yeah,
bent over and let go of his arm. The guy flipped himself
he's
over.
exaggerating clearly, but I'm just saying the technique itself wasn't horrible. It's
Yeah,
just like the reaction to it was where it gets like, what the fuck are we doing here? Now he's just
yeah.
like literally pushing the guy down on his face.
Look at that. He had to rest his when he put his hand on his knee. He's clearly resting. He's tired. Look at
Yeah,
that. That's how I put my hand on my knee when I'm playing basketball and I'm tired.
yeah.
Oh, catch my breath. Whew.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's funny, man. It's funny. I'm glad they're getting exposed because I mean, it's one thing if they're just saying it and they're being harmless, but they're like doing it for the ego. They're calling themselves masters. They want to be worshipped for their styles and they want to get people's money. You know, it's the same thing with religion to me. It's like I don't know. It just all bothers me. So
Yeah.